The red sand beneath Megan Brooks' boots was hot, even through the thick soles of her military-grade footwear. She stood in the center of the massive arena, surrounded by thousands of alien creatures who were all waiting to see her die. The sun above was orange instead of yellow, reminding her that she was very far from home. Megan was 32 years old and had served 8 years in Earth Special Forces before taking a job on a civilian transport ship. She had seen combat before, had trained for situations that most people would consider impossible. But standing here, alone in an alien arena on a planet called Kralex Prime, she wondered if her training would be enough. The Kralex were not a friendly species. They stood between 8 and 10 feet tall, with 4 arms each and bodies covered in hard shells that looked like polished black stone. For 3,000 years, they had forced visitors to their space to fight in trials by combat. Every species that had ever crossed their borders had been given the same choice: fight their champion or die. No one had ever won against a Kralex warrior. Megan's ship, the Wanderer, had made a navigation error. They had crossed into Kralex space by accident while trying to avoid an asteroid field. The Kralex didn't care about accidents. They took the ship, locked up the crew of 17 people, and demanded a trial by combat. If their champion won, everyone on the Wanderer would be executed. If somehow the human champion won, they would all go free. Captain Jake Morrison had volunteered immediately. He was the ship's captain and a former Marine. He was strong, experienced, and willing to die for his crew. But the Kralex had laughed at him. They didn't want to fight the captain, they wanted to fight Megan. The Kralex had studied human biology before the trial. They knew that human females were generally smaller and physically weaker than human males. They thought it would be more entertaining to watch a human woman try to fight their champion. They thought she would be easy to kill. Megan had accepted without hesitation. She was the ship's security chief, and protecting the crew was her job. More importantly, she knew something the Kralex didn't know. She knew that human women who trained for combat were just as dangerous as human men. Size and strength mattered less than people thought when you knew how to fight properly. The crowd above her was getting louder. Thousands of Kralex were placing bets, waving their multiple arms in excitement. They had come to see blood, to see their champion prove once again that the Kralex were the strongest species in the galaxy. A gate on the far side of the arena opened. Vrax the Unbroken walked out, and Megan understood immediately why they called him that. He was massive, even for a Kralex. 9 feet tall, with muscles visible beneath his black shell. He carried 2 plasma blades, one in each of his upper hands. The blades hummed with energy, glowing bright blue in the orange sunlight. Vrax had fought 37 times in this arena. He had killed representatives from a dozen different alien species. He had never lost, never even been seriously injured. The Kralex considered him unbeatable. An official descended from the stands on a floating platform. He wore ceremonial robes and carried a weapon, which he placed on the sand at Megan's feet. It was a plasma rifle, standard Earth military equipment. They must have taken it from the Wanderer's armory. The official's voice boomed across the arena, amplified by speakers. "Human, you may use this weapon. The fight begins when you hear the gong. It ends when one fighter cannot continue or is dead. There are no other rules." Megan picked up the rifle and checked it carefully. It was fully charged, 30 shots available. She had used this exact model hundreds of times during her military service. She knew its weight, its range, its limitations. The official flew back to his viewing box. Vrax began to circle, his 4 arms spread wide, the plasma blades leaving trails of heated air. He was trying to intimidate her, to make her afraid. It was working a little bit, but Megan had learned long ago how to function while afraid. Fear was just information, just your body telling you to be careful. She had spent the last 6 hours studying recordings of Vrax's previous fights. She had watched him kill 3 different aliens in the past year. He was fast for his size, aggressive, and skilled with those plasma blades. He liked to charge straight at his opponents, using his size and speed to overwhelm them before they could think. The crowd was screaming now, working themselves into a frenzy. Megan took a deep breath and centered herself. Her instructor back on Earth, a man named Chen, who had taught her everything about hand-to-hand combat, had always said the same thing. Don't fight the opponent you see. Fight the opponent that exists. What he meant was that people often created an image in their minds of how tough their opponent was. They would either overestimate or underestimate based on appearance. The trick was to see the reality, to understand the actual strengths and weaknesses. Vrax was strong and fast, but he was also predictable. He relied on his natural advantages. He had probably never fought someone who refused to be intimidated by size and strength. The gong sounded, a deep noise that vibrated through Megan's chest. The fight had begun. Vrax charged exactly as Megan had predicted. He closed the distance between them incredibly fast, faster than she had expected even after watching the recordings. His plasma blades whirled through the air, creating patterns of light and heat. Megan raised the rifle and fired 3 times at his chest. The plasma bolts hit him square in the center of his body, but his natural armor was too thick. The shots barely slowed him down. She adjusted her aim and fired at his joints, the places where the armor was thinner. One shot hit his lower right arm, burning the exposed tissue. Vrax roared in pain but kept coming. 20 meters away now, 15 meters. The crowd was going wild, sensing the kill. Megan fired 2 more shots, both hitting Vrax in the chest again with no real effect. 10 meters. She could see his eyes now, filled with confidence and aggression. He knew he had already won. 5 meters. Close enough that she could feel the heat from his plasma blades. Megan dropped the rifle. She simply opened her hands and let it fall to the sand. The weapon clattered against the ground, still charged and functional. She wasn't out of ammunition. She wasn't malfunctioning. She just let it go. The arena fell silent for half a second. Then the Kraleks exploded into cheering. They thought she had given up. They thought the human had realized she couldn't win and had surrendered. Vrax's upper right blade came down in a sweeping arc aimed at Megan's midsection. The blade would have cut her in half if it connected. The Kraleks champion expected her to jump backward, to try to create distance. That was what every other opponent had done when faced with his plasma weapons. Megan moved forward instead. She stepped inside the arc of the blade, moving toward Vrax rather than away from him. The blade passed through empty air where she had been standing a fraction of a second before. Her right hand shot up and grabbed his wrist, just behind where the blade extended from his hand. Her left hand followed immediately, gripping his elbow joint. Vrax was easily 400 pounds heavier than Megan. His strength was legendary among his people. He could bend metal bars with his bare hands and crush stone with his grip. But Megan wasn't trying to overpower him. She was using something much older and more reliable than strength. She was using physics. Megan twisted her body, dropping her weight and turning her hip into Vrax's lower body. She maintained her grip on his arm and used his own forward momentum against him. The technique was called a hip throw, and humans had been using variations of it for thousands of years. It didn't matter how strong your opponent was if you used their own force as the weapon. Vrax went up and over Megan's hip. For a moment, all 9 feet and 400 pounds of the Kraleks champion were airborne. Then, gravity took over. Vrax crashed into the red sand with tremendous force, hard enough to create a small crater. The impact drove all the air from his lungs with a sound like a broken whistle. The cheering stopped. The arena went completely silent. Several Kraleks in the audience sat down abruptly, their multiple arms hanging limp in shock. Vrax rolled to his feet with impressive speed. He was hurt and confused, but he was also well-trained. His plasma blades had automatically shut off when he hit the ground, a safety feature to prevent self-injury. He reactivated them with a thought, and the blue glow returned to his hands. His eyes locked onto Megan with new understanding. This human was not helpless. This human was dangerous. Megan stood 5 meters away, her breathing steady, her posture relaxed but ready. She had already learned what she needed to know from that first exchange. Vrax was fast and strong, but he wasn't used to opponents who understood leverage and timing. He fought like someone who had always won through physical superiority. Vrax spoke for the first time, his words translated by the devices everyone in the arena wore. "You will die slowly for that, human." Megan didn't respond. She was already analyzing his stance, the way he distributed his weight, which arm he favored. Every detail mattered in a fight like this. Vrax attacked again, but this time he was more careful. He used all four arms to create a defensive web of plasma blades while he advanced. 2 blades high, 2 blades low, creating overlapping patterns that should have been impossible to penetrate without getting burned or cut. Megan ducked under the high blades and dropped into a sweep kick that caught Vrax's forward leg. The kick didn't trip him. He was too heavy and stable for that. But it made him shift his weight to compensate. That shift exposed his lower left side for exactly 1/10 of a second. Megan's follow-up strike was already in motion before Vrax even realized he had been exposed. Her fist, properly aligned with her wrist and forearm, driven by her shoulder and core, augmented by the rotation of her entire body, struck the joint where Vrax's lower left arm connected to his torso. Human fists were not designed for striking hard objects. The bones were too small, the joints too delicate. But humans had learned over thousands of years how to turn their hands into weapons through proper technique. A correctly thrown punch didn't just use arm strength, it used the entire body, transferring energy from the ground through the legs, up through the hips and torso, and finally into the point of impact. The joint cracked with a sound like breaking pottery. Vrax howled in pain and stumbled backward. His lower left arm hung at an odd angle, still attached but clearly damaged. The Kralek's audience was no longer cheering. Many were standing, their multiple limbs frozen in positions of disbelief. This wasn't supposed to happen. The human had no weapon. The human should be dead by now. Up in the detention cells above the arena, Megan's crew watched on a small screen. Captain Jake Morrison gripped the bars of his cell so hard his hands were shaking. He had served with Megan for 6 years, had read her service record, knew she was skilled. But this was something beyond skill. This was art. Lieutenant Danny Walsh, the ship's pilot, couldn't look away from the screen. "She's controlling the entire fight," he whispered. "Look at her positioning. She's making him fight her way." Lieutenant Amy Chen, the medical officer, nodded slowly. "Every move has a purpose. She's not just fighting him, she's taking him apart piece by piece." Back in the arena, Vrax was reassessing his opponent. He had fought many different species. He had faced opponents who were strong, opponents who were fast, opponents who were clever. But he had never fought someone who used every part of their body as a weapon, who turned his own size and strength into disadvantages. Vrax changed his strategy. Instead of charging, he began to circle, using his reach advantage to make long, probing attacks with his plasma blades. He was trying to force Megan to back away, to create distance where his natural advantages would matter more. Megan mirrored his movement, staying just outside the maximum reach of the blades. Her eyes never left his center of mass. She was breathing harder now, sweat running down her face in the heat, but her focus remained absolute. Vrax struck 3 times in rapid succession, high-low-middle, a combination designed to overwhelm defenses. Megan rolled under the first blade, blocked the second with her forearm angled to deflect rather than stop it, and twisted away from the third. Each movement flowed into the next like water. But plasma blades didn't need direct contact to hurt. The superheated energy around each weapon created a sphere of burning air. As the middle blade passed within inches of Megan's left shoulder, the heat seared her skin through her uniform. She felt the pain, acknowledged it, and filed it away. Pain was just information. It told you what to protect, but it didn't stop you unless you allowed it to. Vrax saw her reaction to the heat and pressed his advantage. He attacked with renewed aggression, trying to keep her moving, trying to wear her down. If he couldn't hit her directly, he would exhaust her and burn her with the ambient heat until she made a mistake. But as he attacked, Megan noticed a pattern. Vrax favored his upper right arm, using it for the most aggressive and accurate strikes. It was his dominant limb, the one he trusted most. That trust made him predictable, and predictable meant vulnerable. On the next exchange, when Vrax's upper right blade came in fast and hard, Megan didn't dodge. She stepped inside the arc again, accepting a glancing burn across her right bicep that felt like someone had pressed a hot iron against her skin. The pain was intense, but the position was worth it. Vrax the Unbroken stood in the center of the arena, breathing heavily through his mandibles. 3 of his 4 arms were damaged or useless. Burns and impact wounds covered his shell. He had one functional plasma blade left, held in his lower right hand. For the first time in 37 trials by combat, he was losing. Megan circled slowly, maintaining her distance. Her right arm had a nasty burn that would need medical attention later, and her left shoulder ached from blocking one of Vrax's strikes. But she was still functional, still dangerous. More importantly, she was still thinking clearly while Vrax was starting to panic. She could see it in his eyes, in the way he held his body. The confusion was turning into fear. Vrax had built his entire identity on being unbeatable. He was the champion of the Kralex Empire, the warrior who had never lost. And now, a human female, unarmed and half his size, was taking him apart like a puzzle. The Kralex audience began making a low humming sound. Megan's translator identified it as their equivalent of concerned murmuring. They were worried. They were seeing their champion, their proof that Kralex were the strongest species, struggling against a creature they had considered weak. Vrax switched to a purely defensive stance. He held his remaining blade in front of him, trying to create a barrier between himself and the human. He was no longer trying to win through aggression. He was trying to survive long enough to figure out a strategy. But Megan wasn't going to give him time to think. She had learned in her years of combat training that hesitation was fatal. When you had an advantage, you pressed it. When your opponent was hurt, you hurt them more. Not from cruelty, but from necessity. Showing mercy in the middle of a fight could get you killed. She feinted to the left, shifting her weight and shoulders as if she was about to move that direction. Vrax reacted instinctively, swinging his remaining blade in a defensive arc to his right. It was exactly what Megan expected. She had set up the feint with her footwork, had made him believe the attack was coming from that side. When his blade committed to the right, Megan was already moving left. Her knee drove up into Vrax's lower torso, hitting the softer tissue between the plates of his exoskeleton. The strike folded him forward, bringing his head down to a height where Megan could reach it. Her elbow came up in a smooth arc and connected with the side of Vrax's head, just behind his mandible cluster. The blow was precisely measured. Hard enough to disorient his nervous system, not hard enough to cause permanent brain damage or death. Megan had been trained to control her strikes, to choose how much damage to inflict. Vrax staggered sideways, his remaining plasma blade waving erratically as his brain tried to process the impact. His legs wobbled. He was still conscious, still standing, but barely. Megan could have finished it then. A few more strikes to the head, targeting his sensory organs, and Vrax would have been unconscious. The fight would have been over, her crew would have been freed, and they could have left this planet. But she didn't attack. Instead, she stepped back 3 paces and lowered her hands. Vrax shook his head, trying to clear it. His eyes focused on Megan with confusion. Why had she stopped? Why wasn't she finishing the fight? Because Megan understood something that the Kralex didn't. This fight wasn't just about winning. It was about teaching. It was about showing these aliens what humans were, what they were capable of, and why they should be respected rather than underestimated. Vrax managed to straighten up, though his posture was unsteady. His mandibles clicked together as he tried to form words. When he finally spoke, his voice was weak, barely picked up by the translator. "Why?" he asked. "Why did you drop your weapon?" Megan met his eyes directly. She spoke clearly, knowing her words were being translated and broadcast to the entire arena. "Because the weapon was limiting me, and because I wanted you to understand something before this fight ended." She began to move forward slowly, and Vrax actually backed away. The champion of the Kralex Empire, undefeated in 37 trials, was retreating from an unarmed human. Megan continued speaking as she advanced. "Humans don't fight fair. We don't believe in honor matches or traditional combat rules. We believe in winning, and we've spent 300,000 years learning every possible way to hurt, maim, and kill things that are bigger, stronger, and more dangerous than we are." Vrax swung his remaining blade in a desperate horizontal slash, trying to create space between himself and this terrifying human. Megan dropped flat to the sand, feeling the superheated air pass inches above her body. While she was down, she executed another leg sweep, this time with her full body weight behind it. Vrax's legs went out from under him. The massive Kralex warrior fell backward and hit the sand hard for the second time. His remaining plasma blade flew from his grip and skidded across the arena floor. Before Vrax could recover, Megan was on top of him. She placed her knee on his chest, pinning him down. Her hands gripped his mandibles, not hard enough to break them but with enough pressure to make it clear she could if she wanted to. The arena was so silent that Megan could hear the wind blowing across the top of the stands. 10,000 Kralex held their breath, watching a scene they had never imagined possible. Their champion was pinned, helpless, defeated by a human who had discarded her weapon and fought with nothing but her body and her training. Megan looked down at Vrax. She could see the fear in his eyes, but also something else. Understanding, perhaps. Or respect. "Do you yield?" she asked quietly. Vrax's eyes met hers. In that moment, something shifted in his expression. The fear remained, but it was joined by comprehension. He wasn't fighting a weaker species. He was fighting something that had survived on a death world, something that had climbed to the top of the food chain not through natural weapons or thick armor, but through being smarter, more adaptable, and more determined than anything else on their planet. When Vrax spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. "I yield." Megan released him immediately and stood up. She stepped back and raised both hands in a gesture of completion. The fight was over. She had won. The judge descended on his floating platform, his ceremonial robes billowing. When he spoke, his voice sounded hollow, shocked. "The trial is concluded. The human has achieved victory. According to the laws of the Kralex Empire, her ship and crew will be released immediately and provided safe passage out of our space." A sound began to ripple through the audience. It wasn't cheering, but it wasn't hostile either. It sounded like confusion mixed with something that might have been respect. The Kralex were processing what they had witnessed, trying to understand how everything they believed about strength and combat had just been challenged. Megan walked over to where her rifle lay in the sand. She bent down and picked it up, checking it one more time before slinging it over her shoulder. The weapon had served its purpose even after she had set it down. It had made the Kralex underestimate her, had made them think her defenseless when she was anything but. 2 Kralex medical personnel entered the arena cautiously. They approached Vrax, who was sitting up now, cradling his damaged arms. As Megan turned to leave, Vrax called out to her. "Human, wait." Megan paused and looked back. Vrax struggled to his feet, waving off the medical personnel for a moment. He approached Megan slowly, his posture no longer threatening. When he spoke, there was no anger in his voice. Only genuine curiosity. "How many humans fight as you do?" he asked. Megan considered the question carefully. She wanted to be honest, but also wanted Vrax to understand the implications of that honesty. Most humans receive some combat training during military service. Of those who specialize in close combat like me, there are probably a few million across Earth in our colonies. She watched Vrax's eyes widen at the number. A few million. And she was just one of them, not even the best. There were humans who were faster, stronger, more skilled than she was. The walk from the arena to the detention facility took 20 minutes. Megan was escorted by 4 Kralex guards who kept a respectful distance, as if they were afraid to get too close to her. Word had already spread through the facility about what had happened in the arena. Aliens who had been loud and aggressive before now watched her pass in silence. The medical team had insisted on treating her burns before she left the arena. They had applied some kind of gel that instantly cooled the damaged skin and accelerated healing. The Kralex doctor, a smaller individual with lighter-colored shell plates, had apologized multiple times while working. "We regret the unnecessary damage to an honored warrior," he had said through the translator. Megan found the apology strange. An hour ago, these same people had been cheering for her death. Now they were treating her with something that looked like reverence. She didn't fully understand Kralex culture, but apparently defeating their champion had earned her a different kind of status. When she reached the detention area, Captain Jake Morrison was standing at the bars of his cell, his face pale. The moment he saw her, relief washed over his features. "Megan, thank God. We watched the whole thing on the monitors. I thought..." When you dropped that rifle, I thought you'd lost your mind. Megan managed a tired smile. The rifle was just slowing me down, Captain. In close combat with an opponent that fast, I needed maximum mobility. The cell doors opened with an electronic hiss. The Kralex guards stood back as the crew of the Wanderer filed out. 17 people, from various planets and backgrounds, all of whom had been certain they were going to die today. They looked at Megan with a mixture of awe and disbelief. Lieutenant Danny Walsh, the pilot, shook his head slowly. You made it look easy. Like you were just practicing or something. It wasn't easy, Megan said honestly. She could feel the exhaustion starting to catch up with her, now that the adrenaline was fading. Vrax was strong and skilled, but he had never fought anyone who had trained specifically to defeat opponents with physical advantages. Lieutenant Amy Chen, the medical officer, immediately began examining Megan's injuries despite the Kralex treatment. These burns are serious. You're lucky they had that healing gel. Human skin doesn't handle plasma heat well. A Kralex official approached, different from the one who had presided over the arena. This one wore practical clothing rather than ceremonial robes. He addressed Megan directly. Lieutenant Commander Brooks, your ship has been resupplied and all confiscated equipment has been returned. You are free to depart Kralex space immediately. We will provide navigational data for the safest route. Captain Jake stepped forward. What about compensation for the time we've lost? For the danger your people put us through? The official's forearms made a gesture that the translator indicated as embarrassment. The trial by combat is our law. We cannot apologize for following our law. However, the Kralex Empire recognizes that Lieutenant Commander Brooks has demonstrated exceptional skill and honor. We offer safe passage through our space for all human vessels, indefinitely. This is a rare privilege. The crew exchanged glances. Safe passage through Kralex space would save weeks on certain trade routes. It was worth more than money in the long run. Jake nodded slowly. We accept. An hour later, the crew of the Wanderer stood on the bridge of their ship, preparing for departure. The orbital docking clamps had been released, and the Kralex traffic control was giving them priority clearance to leave. Megan stood at the weapons station, her usual position when they weren't in combat. Her arms were still sore, and she could feel the burns under the healing gel, but she was functional. That was all that mattered. As the Wanderer pulled away from Kralex Prime's orbital station, Danny turned from the pilot's console. Did you notice something weird? There were hundreds of Kralex watching us board. Just standing there, watching. Not threatening, just watching. Amy nodded from the medical station. I noticed that too. And the guards who escorted us kept bowing every time Megan looked at them. They're confused, Megan said quietly. Their entire culture is built around the idea that physical strength determines worth. The strongest rule, the weak serve. They've maintained that belief for 3,000 years by winning every trial by combat. She looked out the viewport at the planet receding behind them. And then I came along and proved that strength isn't just about size or natural weapons. I showed them that a smaller, weaker opponent could win through training, technique, and intelligence. That challenges everything they believe. Captain Jake leaned back in his command chair, processing this. So what happens now? Do they change their entire society? I don't know, Megan admitted. But I do know that word of this fight is going to spread. The Kralex broadcast their trials to other species as a form of intimidation. By now, probably a dozen different alien civilizations have seen what happened in that arena. The communications officer, a man named Peter Hayes, looked up from his station. Captain, we're receiving a tight beam transmission from the surface. It's marked as personal, addressed to Lieutenant Commander Brooks. Put it through to my station, Megan said. The screen at her console flickered to life, showing Vrax. He was in what looked like a medical facility, his damaged arms wrapped in some kind of supportive framework. He looked tired but alert. Lieutenant Commander Brooks, Vrax began, his translator rendering his clicks and hisses into English. I wanted to speak with you before you left our space. What you did today will not be forgotten by my people. You defeated me honorably, and in doing so, you taught me something important. What did I teach you? Megan asked. That strength has many forms, Vrax said slowly, as if the concept was difficult for him to articulate. For 3,000 years, the Kralliks have believed that physical power was the only strength that mattered. We measured worth by how much weight someone could lift, how hard they could hit. But you showed me that knowledge can be stronger than muscle. That skill can overcome size. That preparation can defeat natural advantages. He paused, his mandibles clicking thoughtfully. The judge who officiated your trial said something to me after you left. He said that perhaps the reason the Kralliks have never advanced beyond our borders is because we have spent too much time proving we are strong and not enough time learning what to do with that strength. Megan considered her response carefully. Every species has strengths, Vrax. The Kralliks are powerful warriors. That's valuable. But power without wisdom is just violence. Humans learned that lesson a long time ago, during our own wars. We nearly destroyed ourselves because we had the power to kill, but not the wisdom to know when not to. Vrax nodded slowly. I will share your words with the council. I believe they need to hear them. He straightened slightly, despite his injuries. And I must ask you something. Would humans be willing to teach us, not just fighting techniques, but the philosophy behind them? The understanding that makes a warrior more than just someone who can hurt others? Megan glanced at Captain Jake, who nodded slightly. This was her decision to make. I can't speak for all of humanity, Megan said, but I can pass your request along to Earth Command. We'll see what they say. That is all I can ask, Vrax said. Safe travels, Lieutenant Commander. And thank you for not killing me. You could have. I know that now. But you chose to teach instead. That choice honors you. 3 months had passed since the incident on Kralliks Prime. Megan Brooks now stood in a briefing room on Earth's orbital headquarters station, looking out at the planet below while she waited for the meeting to start. The view never got old. That beautiful blue and white sphere that was home to 8 billion humans and countless other species of life. Behind her, the door opened. Admiral Lisa Patterson entered, followed by several other high-ranking military officers and diplomatic officials. They arranged themselves around the large conference table, and holographic displays flickered to life above the surface. Admiral Patterson, a woman in her 50s with gray hair and sharp eyes, pulled up the first display. It showed communication intercepts from dozens of different alien civilizations. Lieutenant Commander Brooks, thank you for coming. What happened on Kralliks Prime has had consequences we're still trying to fully understand. Commander Ryan Martinez from the Diplomatic Corps gestured to the display. Since your trial by combat, we've intercepted communications from 18 different species, all discussing what happened in that arena. The Kralliks broadcasted the footage to their entire empire, as they always do with their trials. But this time, the footage spread beyond their borders. The display showed translations scrolling past in multiple languages. Some expressed concern about human combat capabilities. Others showed curiosity about human training methods. A few showed outright fear. The general assumption among most alien species, Admiral Patterson continued, was that humans relied primarily on technology and numbers for military effectiveness. Many of them believed that without our ships and weapons, we would be relatively helpless in personal combat. Your performance fundamentally changed that perception. Another officer, Colonel Kate Bennett from Military Intelligence, leaned forward. We're calling it the human factor, the ability to adapt, improvise, and fight effectively with minimal resources. Several species are revising their entire military doctrines based on what they observed. Ryan pulled up another display, this one showing formal communications from various governments. We've received requests from 6 different species asking about training programs. They want to send their military personnel to learn human close combat techniques. The Kralliks have formally requested a cultural exchange program. Vrax himself has been appointed as their primary liaison. Megan blinked in surprise. They want to learn from us after what happened. They're calling it learning from the victors, Ryan explained. Apparently, that's a high honor in Kralliks culture. Vrax has become an advocate for changing how the Kralliks approach combat and warfare. He's been touring their empire, giving lectures about what he learned from fighting you. Admiral Patterson pulled up another set of data. But there's a concerning side to this as well. We've intercepted communications from 2 major powers, the Vrakan Combine and the Thessian Federation. Both are categorizing humanity as a high-threat species. They're discussing containment strategies. Containment? Megan asked. What does that mean? Colonel Kate answered, her expression serious. Preemptive action to limit human expansion. Trade restrictions, military blockades, possibly even coordinated strikes against human colonies. They're afraid of what humans might do if we became hostile. Because of one fight? Megan couldn't keep the disbelief from her voice. Because of what one fight revealed, Kate clarified. You demonstrated that a trained human, with no weapons, no armor, no technological advantages, could defeat what was considered one of the deadliest warriors in this region of space. These civilizations are doing the calculations. If one human can do that, what can a million humans do? What about a billion? The room was quiet for a moment. Megan felt a weight settling on her shoulders. She had been trying to protect her crew, to win a fight so they could all go home. She hadn't thought about the larger implications. Admiral Patterson seemed to read her expression. Don't blame yourself, Lieutenant Commander. This was inevitable. Humanity was always going to encounter species who feared our capabilities. You just accelerated the timeline. Ryan leaned back in his chair. The interesting part is how different species are reacting. The Kraleks see you as a teacher, someone who showed them a better way to think about strength. Some smaller species see you as a protector, proof that size doesn't determine who wins. But the larger, more established powers see you as a threat to the existing order. What does Earth Command want me to do? Megan asked. Admiral Patterson smiled slightly. We're offering you a promotion to commander and a position training the next generation of close combat specialists. Earth Defense Force wants to create a program based on what you demonstrated on Kraleks Prime. We want to ensure that every human soldier understands not just how to fight, but why humans fight the way we do. She pulled up another display, this one showing a proposed training facility on Earth. The goal isn't to create super soldiers, it's to create thinking soldiers. People who understand that combat is about more than just strength or firepower. It's about adaptability, creativity, and knowing when to fight and when to find another solution. Megan looked at the plans, her mind racing. You want me to teach them the philosophy, not just the techniques. Exactly, Ryan said. Because every human we send out into the galaxy represents our species. Every interaction with alien civilizations shapes how they perceive us. We need our people to understand that being dangerous and being violent are not the same thing. Colonel Kate added, we also need them to understand the responsibility that comes with being capable of extreme violence. You could have killed Varax. You had multiple opportunities, but you chose to defeat him and then spare him. That choice did more for human diplomacy than 1,000 treaties could have done. The meeting continued for another hour, covering everything from specific training programs to diplomatic strategies for dealing with species who feared humanity. When it finally ended, Megan found herself walking through the station's observation deck, trying to process everything. Lieutenant Danny Walsh found her there an hour later. He had been promoted to captain and given command of the Wanderer. The civilian transport company had been very eager to promote the crew that had survived Kraleks Prime, seeing it as good publicity. Hey, Danny said, joining her at the window. Heard about the promotion. Commander Brooks has a nice ring to it. Yeah, Megan said absently, still staring at Earth. What's wrong? This is a good thing, right? You get to come home, train new recruits, no more cargo runs through dangerous space. Megan was quiet for a moment. Danny, when I was fighting Vrax, I wasn't thinking about representing humanity or changing galactic politics. I was just trying to keep our crew alive. Now they're telling me that fight changed how half the galaxy sees our entire species. That's heavy, Danny agreed. But is it wrong? What you showed them, I mean. That humans are dangerous but also controlled. That we can be violent but choose not to be. Isn't that true? It's true, Megan said. But it's also incomplete. There are humans who aren't controlled, who would have killed Vrax and felt nothing. There are humans who are violent by choice, not necessity. I'm afraid I gave aliens an idealized image of what we are. Danny considered this. Or maybe you gave them an image of what we can be at our best. Every species has good and bad members, but if we're going to be judged as a whole, isn't it better that they judge us based on our potential rather than our worst examples? Megan turned to look at him. When did you become philosophical? 3 months of thinking about watching you beat up a 9-foot alien with your bare hands, Danny said with a grin. It gives you perspective. They stood in silence for a while, watching Earth rotate slowly below them. Finally, Megan spoke again. I'm going to accept the position, not because I think I'm special or because I want to be famous, but because if other humans are going to go out there and encounter aliens, they need to understand what we represent. They need to know that being strong means having the option to not use that strength. That's a good reason, Danny said. So what happens now? 1 year after Kralix Prime, Commander Megan Brooks stood on the training grounds of the newly established Earth Defense Force Combat Philosophy Center. 20 recruits stood before her in formation, humans from various colonies and Earth itself. They were the first class of what would become a new approach to military training. The facility was located in Colorado, built into the mountains where the thin air and rugged terrain provided natural challenges. But, unlike traditional military bases, this facility also had diplomatic quarters, meditation gardens, and classrooms designed for cultural studies. It wasn't just about making soldiers. It was about making ambassadors who could fight if needed, but preferred not to. Megan walked along the line of recruits, examining each one. They were young, eager, and probably expected her to yell at them like instructors in old military films. Instead, she spoke in a normal conversational tone. Most of you have seen the footage from Kralix Prime, she began. You've watched me fight Vrax. Some of you probably think that's what this training is about, learning to do what I did. You're wrong. She paused, letting that sink in. This training is about understanding why I did what I did. It's about learning to read situations, assess opponents, and choose the appropriate response. Sometimes that response is violence. Sometimes it's words. Sometimes it's just walking away. The skill is knowing which option to use. A recruit near the end of the line, a young woman named Kelly Foster, raised her hand. Commander, if the training isn't about fighting, why are we here? The training is about fighting, Megan corrected. But fighting is about more than throwing punches. It's about strategy, psychology, and understanding your opponent better than they understand themselves. When I fought Vrax, the physical combat was the smallest part of what happened. The real fight was making him doubt himself, changing how he thought about strength, and choosing to end the fight without killing him. She gestured toward the training building behind them. Over the next 6 months, you'll learn combat techniques from a dozen different human martial arts traditions. You'll also learn about alien biology, psychology, and culture. You'll study philosophy, ethics, and diplomacy. Because a soldier who only knows how to hurt people is just a weapon. A soldier who knows when to hurt people, when to defend people, and when to find a third option is a warrior. The training began in earnest. Mornings were physical conditioning and combat practice. Afternoons were classroom studies covering everything from alien anatomies to negotiation techniques. Evenings included meditation and reflection exercises designed to help recruits process what they were learning. 3 months into the program, a transport arrived with an unexpected visitor. Vrax the Unbroken, accompanied by 2 other Kralix, came to observe the training facility. He had been invited as part of the cultural exchange program that Earth and the Kralix Empire had established. Megan met him at the landing pad. Vrax looked different than she remembered. His damaged arms had healed, though they moved with a slight stiffness that suggested permanent injury. But his posture was different too, less aggressive, more thoughtful. Commander Brooks, Vrax greeted her with a bow. Thank you for allowing me to visit your facility. Thank you for accepting the invitation, Megan replied. I've been following the changes in the Kralix Empire. The reports say you've been busy. Vrax made a gesture that his translator indicated as rueful agreement. Busy and controversial, not everyone in the Empire agrees with my new perspective on combat and strength. But the High Council has given me permission to implement a new training program, based partly on what I learned from fighting you. Over the next week, Vrax observed the training sessions and gave several lectures to the recruits about Kralix culture and combat philosophy. The recruits were initially intimidated by the 9-foot alien warrior, but Vrax proved to be a patient teacher. During one evening session, a recruit named Stephen Hayes asked Vrax a question that had been on everyone's mind. Sir, how did it feel to lose to Commander Brooks? You were undefeated before that fight? The room went quiet. It was a bold question, possibly even rude. But Vrax didn't seem offended. It felt like waking up, Vrax said slowly. For 37 fights, I had been operating under the assumption that my way was the only way, that strength and aggression were enough. Commander Brooks showed me that I had been asleep, fighting the same fight over and over without learning anything new. He paused, his mandibles clicking thoughtfully. The Kraleks have a saying, "A blade that never bends will eventually break." I was that blade. Rigid, unchanging, convinced of my superiority. Commander Brooks bent me, and instead of breaking, I learned to be flexible. That lesson was worth more than any victory. Later that week, Megan and Vrax stood on an observation platform overlooking the training grounds. Below, recruits were practicing defensive techniques against multiple opponents, working in teams to overcome numerical disadvantages. "Your students are learning well," Vrax observed, "but they still have the human habit of trying to win through cleverness rather than direct confrontation." "That's not a habit," Megan said. "That's deliberate philosophy. Humans have always been physically weaker than most predators on our planet. We survived by being clever, by using tools, by working together. Direct confrontation was usually a last resort." "And yet, when you fought me, you chose direct confrontation," Vrax pointed out. "Because that was the appropriate response for that situation," Megan explained. "You expected me to keep my distance, to rely on the rifle. By going hand to hand, I created surprise and changed the terms of the fight. If I had tried to stay at range, you would have closed the distance and killed me." Vrax was silent for a moment. "I have been thinking about something you said in the arena. You said humans don't fight fair. At the time, I thought you meant humans were dishonorable. But now I understand you meant something different. Fair fights are for sports and training," Megan said. "In real combat, when lives are at stake, the goal is to win as efficiently as possible while minimizing harm to everyone involved. Using tactics your opponent doesn't expect isn't dishonorable. It's smart." The Kraleks' concept of honor was about meeting your opponent on equal terms and proving your superiority, Vrax said. "But that assumes both fighters have the same goal, which is to prove who is stronger. What if your goal isn't to prove superiority but simply to survive and protect others? Then honor becomes about protecting those who can't protect themselves," Megan said. "It becomes about using your strength responsibly. That's what I'm trying to teach these recruits. Not how to be the strongest fighters, but how to be the most responsible ones." By the end of Vrax's visit, he had invited 3 of Megan's recruits to visit the Kraleks Empire and assist with their new training program. The cultural exchange was becoming real, not just a diplomatic agreement on paper. 6 months after the training program began, the first class graduated. All 20 recruits passed and received assignments to various diplomatic and defense positions across human space. But more importantly, they understood what it meant to represent humanity to the galaxy. During the graduation ceremony, Admiral Lisa Patterson gave a speech that addressed not just the graduates, but the broader implications of the program. 1 year ago, Commander Brooks fought in an arena on Kraleks Prime. That fight lasted 21 seconds, but its impact will last for generations. Not because of the violence, but because of what happened after the violence ended. Commander Brooks chose to spare her opponent, to teach instead of destroy. That choice showed the galaxy something important about humanity. She paused, looking at the assembled graduates. "You are going out into a galaxy where humans are still relatively new, still being evaluated and judged by species with thousands of years of history. Every action you take will contribute to how they see us. Fight when necessary, but remember that choosing not to fight is sometimes the greater strength. Use violence as a tool, not a solution. And always remember that you represent not just Earth Defense Force, but humanity itself." After the ceremony, Megan found herself back in the observation deck of Earth's orbital station, the same place where she had struggled with the weight of what her fight had meant. Lieutenant Amy Chen, now promoted to captain and serving as the medical director for the Combat Philosophy Center, joined her. "Feels different this time, doesn't it?" Amy said, looking at Earth below. "Yeah," Megan agreed. "Last time I was here, I was worried about giving aliens an unrealistic image of humanity. Now I'm trying to give humans a realistic image of themselves." "You did good work with this class," Amy said. "They're not just fighters, they're thinkers. They understand context and consequence. I hope so, Megan said. Because the galaxy is paying attention now. The Kralliks aren't the only species that wants to learn from us. We've got requests from 8 different civilizations asking about training programs, cultural exchanges, military alliances. What started as one fight has turned into something much bigger. Amy nodded. And some species are still afraid of us. I heard the Thessian Federation officially designated humans as a restricted contact species. They're limiting how many humans can enter their territory at any time. Fear is natural, Megan said. We're something new, something they don't fully understand. But fear can become respect if we handle this right. That's what I'm hoping these graduates will help accomplish. Far across the galaxy, in the Grand Council Chamber of the Kralliks Empire, Vrak stood before the assembled leadership, giving his report on the human training facility. The High Council listened intently as he described what he had seen and learned. The humans are not creating super warriors, Vrax concluded. They are creating something more dangerous. They are creating thinking warriors who understand when to fight, how to fight, and most importantly, when not to fight. Their strength comes not from size or natural weapons, but from the space between their ears and the discipline to use it wisely. The High Chancellor leaned forward. And what do you recommend, Vrax? Should the Kralliks Empire fear this new humanity? Vrax considered the question carefully. Fear them? Perhaps. But I recommend something different. I recommend we respect them, learn from them, and work alongside them. Because the humans have learned something that took us 3,000 years to begin understanding. That true strength is not about dominating others, but about protecting what matters while having the wisdom to know when protection requires violence and when it requires restraint. Back on Earth, Megan Brooks stood in front of her second class of recruits. 50 this time, with a waiting list of hundreds more. The program was expanding, and with it, a new understanding of what it meant to be a human warrior in a galaxy full of species who were still figuring out where humanity fit. You've all seen the footage, Megan began, the same way she always started. Some of you think this training is about learning to do what I did. You're wrong. This training is about understanding why. And that why is more important than any technique I can teach you. She looked at the eager faces before her, seeing in them the future of human presence in the galaxy. 14 seconds. That's how long it took from when I dropped my weapon until Vrax was on the ground. But those 14 seconds happened because of years of training, study, and learning to see combat as a puzzle to be solved rather than a contest to be won. That's what you're here to learn. As she began the first lesson, Megan thought about that moment in the arena, the sound of the rifle hitting the sand, the shocked silence of the crowd. She had been so focused on surviving, on protecting her crew, that she hadn't realized she was changing the galaxy's understanding of what humanity could be. Now, 1 year later, she was helping to ensure that understanding was accurate. Humans were dangerous, yes, but they were also thoughtful, adaptable, and capable of choosing peace even when violence was an option. That combination, more than any weapon or technique, was what would define humanity's place among the stars. The galaxy had learned that humans could fight. Now it was time to teach them that humans could also choose not to. And that choice, that discipline, that wisdom was what made humanity truly worth respecting. Now I write a formal response to the Kralliks, Megan said. I'm going to recommend that Earth Command accept their request for a cultural exchange. We can learn from them, too. Their strength and discipline have value. We just need to help them understand that strength without wisdom is incomplete. Think they'll listen? Danny asked. Vrax listened, Megan said. And if he can change his perspective after 3,000 years of tradition, then maybe others can too. It's worth trying. As she walked back toward the administrative section to draft her recommendations, Megan thought about that moment in the arena when she had dropped her rifle. At the time, it had been a tactical decision, removing a limitation that would have slowed her down. But in retrospect, it had been symbolic too. She had set aside the thing that made her feel safe, the technological advantage, and relied on something more fundamental: her training, her intelligence, her human adaptability. Maybe that was the real lesson. Humans didn't need to be the biggest or the strongest or the most heavily armed. They just needed to be themselves, to use the gifts that 300,000 years of evolution had given them, and to remember that true strength included knowing when to fight and when to teach instead. The transmission ended. The bridge of the Wanderer was quiet for a moment. Finally, Lieutenant Amy Chen spoke. "You could have killed him. I saw the moment when you had him pinned. You could have finished it." "I could have," Megan agreed. "But killing him would have just made them fear humans. Defeating him and then sparing him showed them that humans have restraint, that we understand the difference between winning and destroying. That's a more important lesson than any combat technique." As the Wanderer cleared Kralek's space and jumped to faster-than-light travel, Megan filed her report about Vrax's request. She had no idea if Earth Command would agree to a cultural exchange program with the Kraleks. But she knew that what had happened in that arena today would have consequences far beyond just freeing one ship and its crew. She had shown the galaxy something about humanity that many species didn't understand. Humans were dangerous, yes, but they were also capable of choosing when to use that danger and when to offer a hand instead of a fist. That combination, Megan suspected, was what would truly make humanity a force in the galaxy. Vrax was silent for a long moment, absorbing this information. Then he did something that surprised Megan. He lowered himself into a position that her translator indicated was a bow of respect among his people. "Your species honors its warriors well, human. You have taught me something today that I will not forget." Megan returned the gesture with a slight nod. She didn't feel victorious or proud. She felt tired and relieved that her crew would live. But she understood that what had happened here would have consequences beyond just freeing the Wanderer. Her left hand struck Vrax's wrist from the inside, redirecting the blade away from her body. Her right hand, formed into a palm strike, hit his elbow joint from below, hyperextending it. The angle was wrong for his anatomy to bend that way. Something inside the joint popped audibly. Vrax screamed. The plasma blade fell from his suddenly useless fingers and deactivated as it hit the sand. His upper right arm hung limply, the elbow joint damaged beyond immediate function. The audience was completely silent now. Some Kraleks were checking their recording devices as if the footage must be wrong. This couldn't be happening. Their champion, undefeated in 37 trials, was being systematically destroyed by an unarmed human who stood 3 feet shorter than him. Megan backed away 3 steps, giving Vrax room to process what had happened. She could have pressed the attack, could have finished it while he was disoriented. But she wanted him to understand, wanted all the Kraleks to understand what they were seeing. 1 weapon down, 3 arms compromised, and only 18 seconds had passed since she dropped the rifle. Even Vrax slowed his charge for a moment, confused by what he was seeing. Why would she drop her only weapon? But Megan hadn't surrendered. She had just stopped limiting herself. The weapon had served its purpose. It had made them all believe they understood how this fight would go. It had made them think in terms of ranged combat, of shooting and defending. But Megan had never planned to win with the rifle. The rifle was just a distraction, a way to control their expectations. Now, as Vrax recovered from his confusion and lunged forward with his plasma blades aimed at her body, Megan prepared to show the Kraleks what humans were really capable of when everything else was stripped away. She dropped into a ready stance, her body relaxed but prepared, and waited for Vrax to come within range. The Kraleks were still cheering, certain of their champion's victory. They would stop cheering very soon.